Hello, and welcome to another book review. Today we're going to be looking at Aloha Betrayed, Native Hawaiian Resistance to American Colonialism by Noenoe Silva. A little bit here first about the author. Professor Silva is currently a professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, and she specializes in courses on Hawaiian indigenous politics and Hawaiian language. She is Native Hawaiian, which is called Kanaka Maoli. And in 2020, she received the Presidential Citation for Meritorious Teaching. So, quite an honor at the University of Hawaii. A quote about the book. Beautiful and irresistible are the people's voices, in their own language and in their essays, stories, poetry, and song. Their hidden transcripts and resistance to oppression reveal a love of the land and a determined and sustained rejection of the colonizers' imposed silences. Aloha Betrayed offers a devastating critique of colonial historiography and, crucially, a firm foundation for nation building. So, really, what I think this quote illustrates about the book is the people's voices. And Professor Silva does a great job in her book about keeping the people's voices at the forefront and using the actual Hawaiian language to demonstrate the various themes that she's trying to argue. So, in the book, what she is arguing is that the Kanaka Maoli, the Native Hawaiians, did not passively accept the erosion of their culture and loss of their nation. For those of you that have taken a U.S. history class, often the annexation of Hawaii is a very brief moment in the curriculum, and the resistance efforts by Native Hawaiians are likely not addressed. Additionally, this book is a critique of the colonial historiography and it protests the narrative of the colonizers. So it goes against many of the accounts that are actually taught today. It focuses on stories, editorials, essays, songs, and poetry produced in Hawaiian newspapers to provide the account of the resistance efforts. And so she does a deep dive into the archives, a deep dive into the various locations in Hawaii where these stories, where these newspapers have been kept. And additionally, she emphasizes the changing role of women and how women had a large role in politics and in the resistance at the beginning and then again at the end. But that was really despite a lot of efforts by the whites who came in who tried to enforce their own ideals of proper gender roles. The Kanaka Maoli of the 19th century, in addition to strenuously resisting every encroachment on their lands and lifeways, consciously and continuously organized and directed their energies to preserving the independence of their country. Throughout the 19th century, print media, particularly newspapers, functioned as sites for broad social communications, political organizing, and the perpetuation of the native language and culture. So, this really summarizes what she does in this book. She explains that strenuous resisting and uses print media, the newspapers, to demonstrate the ways in which that happened. Here was just one little image on in the book where it described the various newspapers going on in the mid 1800s, and I found them to be really interesting in that even some of the Hawaiian language newspapers, were put in place by the government. And so, really, there was only this one resistance newspaper, which she dives really in depth on um, not only what the newspaper produced, but also the backlash to that newspaper. So, in the book chapters, the first chapter is going to deal with the very early interactions on the island between the Kanaka Maoli and the foreigners. So, as whites began to enter into the land, began the efforts of oppression, how did the Native Hawaiians react to that? The next chapter is where she really gets into the newspapers, how she found them. She describes a lot of the aspects of the Hawaiian language and how just someone who has learned Hawaiian secondarily is going to miss a lot of the interpretations. The Hawaiian language has a lot of nuance, a lot of double meanings to certain words. And so people reading it who aren't native Hawaiian are going to miss a lot of that nuance. The third chapter is about King Kalakua's revival of the Hawaiian culture, how when he came in, there was an opposing American oligarchy that were trying to destroy the Hawaiian culture. And he brings back the hula, he brings back a lot of the elements of the culture that the missionaries and other white colonizers had tried to destroy. Chapter 4 is more about the attempted annexation, the process of annexation by the United States, and how there was a struggle against it. And the resistance was focused on this I Aloha Ainai. I researched these pronunciations, but now they're slipping my mind. I apologize. But it means love of the land, and how the Native Hawaiians not just wanted to self rule, but they wanted to maintain this respect, this mutual understanding of the gifts of the land and their role in preserving the land. And then chapter 5 is about Queen Liliuokalani and how she was kind of this last actor, the central player in the annexation, and how she worked within the American political system, within the international rules to try to protest official annexation. And it really details the ways in which she did that and her brilliance in that, and um, demonstrates what the Native Hawaiians are still able to do because of her role. When the stories can be validated, as happens when scholars read the literature in Hawaiian and make findings available to the community, people begin to recover from the wounds caused by that disjuncture in their consciousness. And so, really, what this book does is it validates the stories of the Kanaka Maoli, and um, it it allows them to have truth to their resistance efforts versus the predominant traditional story of a passive acceptance of colonization. So really the strongest contribution I found was that it refutes that myth of passivity by a comprehensive documentation and analysis of various forms of resistance. It brings the Hawaiian experience and narrative, the language, to the forefront of the historical record. Um, I was really interested in the nuances of the Hawaiian language and how that is very different from the way people interpret the English language. And it also analyzes the political content of Hawaiian newspapers, which has previously been overlooked. They've been looked at for more cultural value, but this book analyzed the political content that was more hidden. And not as obvious. Anyways, very interesting account here on Aloha Betrayed, and really providing the the truth to the narrative that is more commonly known. Please subscribe and like, and shoot me a comment if you've also read it or what you found interesting in the book.